Thank you for tuning into another video from JRM Recaps. Spoilers ahead. In the initial scene of the movie, a youthful black man, Andre, is seen strolling around alone, at night, through a quiet rural, suburban road. A small vehicle pulls up and begins gradually following him. Andre gets scared and decides to take an alternate route. He quickly begins to stroll back the way originally came from. When he goes to cross the street, he observes the vehicle is parked, with the front door wide open. Suddenly, a man in a mask assaults Andre, renders him unconscious, and hauls his body to the vehicle. Rose shows up at her boyfriend Chris' loft with coffee and baked goods. He's a photographer and loves to take photos. They're preparing to leave at the end of the week to visit her family, but he's worried that they don't have any idea she's dating a black man. She guarantees him that, while they will probably express a few dumb things, they have very progressive views. Her father would have even decided in favor of Obama for a third presidential term if it were possible. Chris inquires as to whether he's the first person of color she's ever had a relationship with, and she says he is. However, she's certain that her parents will be very cool about the situation. On the ride to her folks' home, Chris takes out a cigarette, but Rose takes it and tosses it through the open window, explaining that her folks would loathe that she is in a relationship with a smoker. Chris calls his friend Rod, a TSA agent at the local airport, and reminds him to take good care of his pet dog. Rod, opposing Chris dating a white lady, scolds him and says visiting her family is not a good idea. Rod then begins to flirt with Rose, which triggers Chris to show signs of jealousy. Rose believes it's sweet that Chris gets a little bit envious. While they're somewhere in the middle of a discussion and not completely focusing, a deer runs out in front of the vehicle and is hit. They head over to explore the accident and call the police, who ask what they're doing there. Rose lets them know that they're visiting her family who live close by. The policeman requests to see Chris's ID. However, Rose strides in and says that since he wasn't the one operating the vehicle, there's no requirement for that. The official lets them go, and Chris tells Rose that it was hot the way in which she stood up for him against the bigoted police officer. Chris and Rose pull up at her parents' home. Her dad, Dean Armitage, is a friendly neurosurgeon who, indeed, lets Chris know that he would have voted in favor of Obama a third time if it were possible. Her mom, Missy, is a peculiarly strange acting hypnotherapist. She offers to fix Chris of his addiction to cigarettes and nicotine through hypnosis. However, he doesn't feel comfortable with the idea of being hypnotized, so he passes on the offer. We see that the Armitages have two on-location helpers who are black: Walter, the groundskeeper, and Georgina, the housekeeper/maid. Dean recognizes that it looks terrible, two well-off white individuals having two helpers who are dark. However, they were employed to assist with his folks, and Dean would have felt awful for them not to be there anymore after they had passed. However, Chris can sense something not adding up with both Walter and Georgina and notices that they act very strange. Dean provides Chris with a visit through the house and shows him old family photographs. Dean explains that his dad was a track sprinter who was beat down by Jesse Owens to compete in the 1936 Olympics before Hitler. And keeping in mind that that was miserable for his father, it was ironic to have Hitler's Aryan vision destroyed by a black athlete. There are additional photographs of Rose's brother throughout the house, to which Dean mentions he's studying to be a surgeon just like his father, but has recently gone through some tough times. The family gets together for some tea in the afternoon. Missy blends her tea and softly taps her spoon against the teacup 3 times. Very significant later, Missy gets some information about Chris's folks. Chris claims that his dad left when he was youthful and his mom passed away after being hit by a vehicle when he was 11 years old. While conversing, Georgina begins to pour tea, but glitches out while pouring tea, and Missy advises her to go and get some rest. The Armitages tell Rose that they're hosting their huge gathering tomorrow. She's astounded, and they remind her that it's always on the same day every year. Rose's brother Jeremy shows up to the house to join everyone. We see that he is a combative, spoiled rich kid. That evening at supper, an intoxicated Jeremy begins conversing with Chris about MMA fighting, saying that Chris would be perfect at it. He suggests they play fight. However, Chris says that he has rules about play fighting with people who are intoxicated. Missy and Dean advise Jeremy that perhaps it's the ideal opportunity for him to call it a night and go to sleep. Chris and Rose resign to their room where she is sorry for her family and they nod off. Around midnight, Chris gets up and chooses to escape for a cigarette. While outside he sees something far off charging at him. It's Walter. He runs directly toward Chris, but makes a sharp turn at the last second and runs off toward another path. Inside the house, Georgina is gazing through a window. Chris believes she is looking at him, but it turns out she's seeing her own appearance, not him. She fixes her hair and Chris chooses to go back inside. Before Chris can return to his room, Missy frightens him by turning on a light. She says smoking is a vice and offers again to assist him with stopping. He sits but ridicules the idea of a trance-like influence, ignorant to the fact that she is already gradually entrancing him, involving her teaspoon as a focus object. She returns him to the night his mother passed away when he was 11, and he tells her that his mom didn't get back home from work and he was excessively terrified to do anything, so he stayed up watching TV the whole time. We come back to present-day Chris as he is digging his nails into the arms of the seat, similar to what he did as a child the night of his mother's passing. She taps her teacup with her spoon 3 times and advises him to sink. 11-year-old Chris sinks into his bed, while present-day Chris sinks into obscurity, seeing himself and Missy far above. His awareness has left his body, which is immobilized in the seat. He wakes up the next morning and looks at his cell phone. Rod has sent Chris a fake image of him giving his dog a beer. His battery is low, so he connects it to charge. Chris tells Rose that he thinks her mother mesmerized him the previous evening. He has hazy memories of the night. The Armitage's rich companions show up for the large party. It is made up of elderly white individuals directing numerous unfitting and borderline racist things to Chris. Chris sneaks off to get away and finds a visually impaired man named Jim Hudson who says that every one of the individuals at the party are oblivious. He's an art salesman, even though he is blind, which intrigues Chris. Jim says that he loves Chris's work. He perceives the irony of a visually impaired art salesman, yet lets him know that he has a great assistant who is perfect at explaining the pieces to him. Jim then tells Chris he is jealous of Chris's eye. Jim says that he once tried his hand at photography, however was not good at it. When Chris returns to the party, he comes across another black individual. He's about Chris's age and Chris attempts to engage with him, however he comes to find he is rigid and unnatural like Georgina and Walter. Be that as it may, something about him appears to be familiar to Chris. Chris chooses to check in with Rod once more, and he finds his telephone turned off once more. He connects it, calls Rod, and lets him know all that has been going on, to which Rod replies with a few absurd statements. Rose finds Chris and he tells her how abnormal everything is and that his telephone was turned off once more. She lets him know he's simply being suspicious in light of the fact that he's in an awkward circumstance at the party. He goes along with it and she leaves. Rod advises Chris to snap a photo of the individual of color and he will check whether he recalls him at all. As Chris is going to leave, he's obstructed by Georgina who apologizes for turning off his telephone. She lifted it up while cleaning the end table, and when it became unplugged she would have rather not touch it any further. He says that it's fine and that he didn't intend to rat her out. She seems confused as she does not understand what ratting someone out means, so he explains that all he meant was that he didn't intend to cause her any problems. He then confesses to her that big groups of white people tend to make him uncomfortable. Georgina then gets very strange and lets out a single tear while letting him know that the Armitages treat her like family. When Chris returns outside he attempts to take a picture of the young black man with the camera on his phone, yet has neglected to switch off the flash. When his telephone flashes, the man changes. He goes from excessively proper to raving. He begins to have a nosebleed and lunges towards Chris telling him, "Get out. Get the freak out while you still can." Rose is now very upset as well. She asks her father what occurred and he clears up that the flash just caused the individual to have a seizure. The man emerges and apologizes for disturbing everybody and says he should get back home. Rose and Chris take a walk and Chris tells her that he's certain he knows the individual and that something odd is most certainly going on. She concurs by saying that it didn't appear to be a seizure by any means. Chris says that he'd truly prefer to return home at this point. Rose hesitantly concurs. She says she will make up something to tell her folks. Back at the house, Dean is holding an auction with his visitors, who hold up raffle cards to bid. Close to him is an image of Chris. Jim Hudson wins the sale. All the other visitors then return to their homes. Chris goes to pack his things and gets a call from Rod, who lets him know that the person in the image is a person they knew named Dre, who used to work at a cinema however disappeared half a month prior. The telephone battery dies. Chris sees that the wardrobe entryway is open. He peers inside and finds a container loaded up with photographs of Rose posing with numerous other black men. He notes photographs of her with both Georgina and Walter, who don't by any stretch of the imagination look like the versions that Chris has met. Evidently Chris isn't the sole person of color Rose has been with after all. Rose returns and Chris says that he wants the keys to place their luggage in the vehicle. She searches for them in her purse as they advance out of the house. Unexpectedly, Jeremy shows up, impeding the front entryway. Missy and Dean are there as well. Jeremy is prepared to charge, yet Missy and Dean advise him to settle down. Chris continues to advise Rose to get the keys. Dean and Missy let Chris know that they don't believe he should leave. Chris requests the keys once more and Rose says, serenely, "You realize I can't give you the keys." Chris at long last understands that Rose also is in on whatever is going on. Jeremy assaults Chris. Dean shouts and Missy rings the teaspoon on her glass, making Chris sink once more into the dark abyss. In the meantime, Rod continues to attempt to call Chris, but it continues to go directly to voicemail. He looks into the image of the person in the photograph and sees that he disappeared some time prior, so he goes to the police. Rod tells them his ridiculous theory about his friend becoming a sex slave and needing help. At the point when he gets done, they all start to laugh out loud. No one will listen to him in a serious way. Chris awakens and notices he is bound to a seat in front of a mounted deer head and an old television. He watches a video made by Dean's dad that discusses about everlasting life and so forth. Chris sees that his fingernails have ripped through the leather arm of the seat and uncovered the cushioning. The teacup and spoon show up on the screen once more. 3 chimes and he's out. Rod attempts Chris' telephone once more and Rose picks up. She lies by saying that Chris left 2 days prior and she's worried about where he is as well. She explains that he left in a taxi or perhaps an Uber. Rod tells her that he went to the police and she appears to be concerned. He begins to understand that something is off base, so he attempts to record the call, yet when he begins conversing with her once more, she lets him know she realizes he really wants to be with her. He tells her she's an insane woman and ends the call. Chris awakens and Jim Hudson is on the television. He lets Chris know that they will be trading each other's brains. The others at the party were all interested in also being a person of color, however Jim couldn't care less about that. What he truly wants is to have the ability to see the world through Chris's eyes. Dean has honed in the neurosurgery procedure to make this all attainable. Also, Missy entrances the body donors to prepare them for the surgery. He will keep existing in the obscure void, yet will just exist kind of as a passenger. We then learn that the flashing of a camera creates a side effect, as they saw before at the party. 3 taps of the teaspoon and Chris is out once more. Jeremy and Dean prepare Jim Hudson for a brain transplant surgery. Dean advises Jeremy to go get Chris. Jeremy goes a few doors down. We see now they were on the basement floor and sees Chris is passed out. He removes his straps and gets an IV prepared. Chris wasn't passed out and was instead just pretending. He stuffed cushioning from the seat in his ears to obstruct tapping of the teaspoon. He then renders Jeremy unconscious. Dean calls for Jeremy and leaves the lab to search for him. Chris attacks him and spears him with the deer horns from the other room. He bumps over a light candle that catches a nearby blanket on fire. Rose has headphones in and doesn't know any of this is going on. While she pays attention to music, she is researching pictures of her next victim. Chris goes upstairs and tracks down Missy. She reaches for the teacup and spoon, yet Chris beats her to them and crushes the cup. She instead goes after him with a blade, puncturing his hand. Chris then turns it on her and stabs her to death with the knife while it is still in his hand. Chris goes for the front entryway once more, however Jeremy has returned and places him in a stranglehold. 2 times Chris battles to pull open the front door, but Jeremy kicks it shut. On the 3rd attempt, as Jeremy kicks the door, Chris cuts him in the leg and beats him down. He runs outside and gets into Jeremy's vehicle. On the front seat is the mask from the first scene. He begins down the driveway yet hits Georgina with the vehicle. He can't simply let her lie there as it reminds him of his mother, so he gets her in the vehicle and keeps going down the driveway. She awakens and goes after him. In the process her hairpiece tumbles off and we see she has a scar across her head from a brain transplant surgery as well. They collide with a tree which causes her to pass away. Rose hears all this commotion through her headphones. Out of nowhere, the rear view mirror is blown away. Rose is coming after Chris with a gun. He pleads with her to stop, yet she sees Georgina and calls her grandmother. Rose shoots once more and misses Chris. Suddenly, Walter runs past Rose to chase down Chris, and Rose says, "Get him, Grandpa," as he brings Chris to the ground. They wrestle and Chris snaps his photo with the flash on. Walter turns and asks Rose for her gun. She gives it to him, and he shoots her in the torso, prior to directing the gun back toward himself. Rose is lying on the ground bleeding out from her wound. She attempts to go after the gun, however Chris moves it out of her reach. As he moves closer to her, Rose puts a hand on his cheek and lets Chris know that she loves him. Chris begins to strangle Rose, but stops because he can't do it. A squad car pulls up. Rose calls pitifully for help, realizing the local police will toss Chris behind bars. Be that as it may, it's actually Rod getting out of the squad car. Chris gets into the vehicle. Rod takes a gander at the mayhem and tells his friend that he was right and should never have gone to the house. When Chris asks Rod how he was able to locate him, Rod reminds him that he works for the TSA and that everything will be okay. Rose grins with her final gasp as Rod and Chris drive away into the evening. The film closes with Rod driving Chris away from the place as Rose lies dead in the street. Thank you for watching our recap. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe for future videos. Also, try some of our other videos displayed on screen.